According to a September 2025 Wall Street Journal and NORC poll, the percentage of Americans who believe that hard work leads to economic gain has fallen to 25%. That is the lowest level in the history of the question, which has been asked since 1987. 3 out of 4 Americans no longer believe the fundamental promise of their own country. And a March 2026 Pew Research Center poll found that 41% of Americans believe the United States is getting weaker. Not staying the same, getting weaker. And in a January 2021 poll taken immediately after the Capitol attack, 79% of Americans said the country was falling apart. Nearly 70% said the American dream no longer holds true or never did. That is not what a confident nation looks like. That is what a population looks like when it has already absorbed in its bones, in its gut, something that its leaders refuse to say out loud. The country is declining, not in the future tense, not as a warning right now. In front of you, in the data, in the rankings, in the currency, in the infrastructure, in the life expectancy, in the debt, in the military reach, in the trust of the world. Every single metric that historians use to track the rise and fall of empires is moving in the wrong direction for the United States of America. And you are watching it happen, you are living inside it. And this video is going to show you the specific numbers, the specific comparisons, and the specific historical parallels that prove it beyond any reasonable doubt. Because the conversations about American decline that happen in universities, in think tanks, in foreign policy journals, and in the offices of hedge fund managers who position their portfolios around the thesis of imperial decline never make it to the evening news. The evening news tells you about the stock market and the unemployment rate and the GDP number, and none of those metrics capture what is actually happening to the long-term trajectory of the country. GDP can grow while the empire declines. The stock market can rise while the infrastructure crumbles. The unemployment rate can be low while 90% of new jobs are in a single sector, and the rest of the economy is frozen in what Stanford called a low-fire equilibriums. The metrics that the news reports are short-term, the metrics that track empires are long-term. And the long-term metrics for the United States are catastrophic. And you are not supposed to see them all assembled in one place, because assembling them in one place produces a picture that is too disturbing for anyone with a political career or a corporate sponsor to present to you on television. So I am presenting them to you here without a sponsor, without a party, without anything to protect except the truth about the country you are living in and the trajectory it is on. Every empire that ever died followed this exact pattern, and America is following it line by line. Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world, spent years studying the rise and fall of the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, and the American Empire using quantitative metrics that track education, innovation, competitiveness, military strength, reserve currency status, trade output, financial center status, and economic competitiveness. And the pattern he documented in Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order is identical across every empire that has ever risen and fallen. Empires rise through innovation, strong institutions, sound education, and a willingness to invest in the future. They peak when their currency becomes the world's reserve, when their military is dominant, and when their financial system is the center of global capital. And they decline through debt accumulation, internal inequality, political fragmentation, loss of education leadership, currency erosion, military overextension, and the emergence of a rising challenger that is doing everything the declining empire used to do. Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, Britain, every single one. And America, according to Dalio's own model, is in the late stages of the decline phase. Not the early stages, the late stages. The debt-to-GDP ratio that Dalio tracks crossed 100%. The income inequality that erodes social cohesion has reached levels not seen since the Gilded Age. The dollar's share of global reserves has dropped from 71% in 2000 to approximately 57% today. The educational system that once led the world now ranks 36th in math and 11th in science among OECD countries according to PISA data. The political system is in a state of paralysis that the credit rating agencies, in their downgrade rationales, specifically cited as the evidence of institutional decline. And the rising challenger, China, now counts over 120 countries as its largest trading partner. Not America, China. In the past 25 years, the United States signed more than 20 military agreements with other nations. China signed approximately 25 economic partnership agreements. America projects power through alliances and weapons. China projects power through trade and infrastructure. And history shows that the empire that builds roads always outlasts the empire that builds bases. Americans die 3.7 years younger than people in comparable countries, and the gap has been widening since the 1950s. KFF published an analysis in March 2026 showing that life expectancy at birth in the United States is 79 years as of 2024. The average life expectancy in comparable wealthy countries is 82.7 years. Americans die 3.7 years younger than people in countries of similar wealth and development. And the United States spends nearly twice as much per person on healthcare as those peer countries. Twice the money, 3.7 fewer years of life. That is not a healthcare system. That is an extraction system dressed in a lab coat, and the gap is not closing. Research published in the American Journal of Public Health by Dr. Stephen Wolfe tracked the life expectancy trajectories of 236 countries over 8 decades and found that the U.S. began falling behind peer countries in the mid-1950s, not in the 2000s. Not when the opioid crisis hit, in the 1950s. The decline has been in progress for 70 years. The United States now ranks approximately 42nd in the world in life expectancy. Behind Costa Rica, behind Cuba, behind Lebanon, behind Chile. Behind every single Western European country. Behind Japan, South Korea, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Multiple American states, particularly in the Midwest and the South, now rank behind Albania in life expectancy. The richest country in the history of civilization produces shorter lives than Albania. And the Institute for New Economic Thinking documented that even the best-performing American states, New York and Hawaii, are still outperformed by other countries. There is no state in America that matches the life expectancy of the top-performing nations. Not one, and this is not because of genetics or geography, it is because of policy. Other countries invested in universal health care, in public health infrastructure, in maternal care, in childhood nutrition, in preventive medicine. America invested in insurance company profits, in pharmaceutical marketing, in administrative overhead, and in a system that charges $18.400 out-of-pocket maximum for a family that already has insurance. The life expectancy gap is not a medical failure. It is an empire that stopped investing in its own people while continuing to invest in its military, its financial system, and its billionaires. And empires that stop investing in their citizens are empires that are dying. Every historian who has studied the pattern will tell you that. National debt crossed $38 trillion, and the interest alone now exceeds the defense budget. In late October 2025, the American national debt crossed $38 trillion. That is larger than the country's entire GDP. The debt-to-GDP ratio is approximately 100% for publicly held debt, and significantly higher when you include intergovernmental holdings. A quarter century ago, the United States had a budget surplus, 25 years. That is all it took to go from surplus to the largest sovereign debt in human history. And the interest payments on that debt crossed $1 trillion per year in 2025, exceeding the entire defense budget. The country now spends more money paying interest on money it already borrowed than it spends defending itself. And 34 cents of every dollar in federal tax revenue goes to interest payments. Not to roads, not to schools, not to Medicare, not to veterans, to interest. To servicing debt that was accumulated by a political system that could not stop spending, because stopping spending meant losing the next election. And the One Big Beautiful Bill Act added approximately $4.7 trillion more to the trajectory. All three credit rating agencies, S&P, Fitch, and Moody's, have now downgraded the United States from AAA. The American Enterprise Institute, which is not a left-wing think tank, published an analysis identifying 3 challenges to the American economic order: profligacy, protectionism, and politicization, and they said all 3 are getting worse. The profligacy means the United States cannot stop borrowing. The protectionism means it is retreating from the global trade system it built. The politicization means its economic institutions, including the Federal Reserve, are being captured by partisan interests. Those three trends are not symptoms of a healthy empire adjusting to new conditions. Those are the symptoms identified by every historian who has studied imperial decline. Rome debased its currency, Spain borrowed against future silver revenues. Britain accumulated war debts it could not service. And America is borrowing $1 trillion every 100 days to fund a government that cannot pass a budget without shutting itself down. The debt is not just a fiscal problem, it is a sovereignty problem. When you owe $38 trillion and your largest foreign creditor is the country that is simultaneously replacing you as the world's dominant trading partner. Your debt is a leash, and the leash is getting shorter every quarter. And here is something that nobody in Washington will explain, because explaining it would require admitting that the decisions of the past 25 years were catastrophic. In the year 2000, the United States had a projected 10-year budget surplus of $5.6 trillion. That surplus was supposed to pay down the national debt, shore up Social Security, and fund the investments in infrastructure, education, and healthcare that would have maintained America's competitive position in the 21st century. Instead, the surplus was spent on tax cuts, 2 wars, a financial crisis bailout, pandemic relief, and now another round of tax cuts that adds $4.7 trillion more. The $5.6 trillion surplus became a $38 trillion debt. That is a $43.6 trillion swing in 25 years. And the people who made those decisions, the presidents, the senators, the representatives, the lobbyists, the donors, are either retired with government pensions, serving on corporate boards, or running for re-election on platforms that promise to do the same thing again. Not one of them has been held accountable for the single largest fiscal deterioration in the history of human civilization. And the Social Security Trust Fund, the promise that was made to every working American that their retirement was guaranteed, is projected to deplete by 2032 or 2033 with automatic benefit cuts of 23 to 28% if Congress does not act. Congress has not introduced a single bill to fix it, not one. Because fixing it would require telling voters either that their taxes will go up or their benefits will be cut. And neither option is politically survivable. So they do nothing and the trust fund bleeds. And the citizens who paid into it for 35 or 40 years watch the balance decline on a chart they never see because nobody shows it to them. Over 120 countries now call China their largest trading partner, and the dollar's monopoly is bleeding out. In 2000, the United States dollar accounted for 71% of global foreign exchange reserves. Today it is approximately 57%. That is a 14-point decline in 26 years. And the decline is accelerating. China-US Focus, a policy analysis organization, documented that over 120 countries now count China, not the United States, as their largest trading partner. 120 countries, that is more than half the nations on Earth. And the mechanism by which China achieved this was not military, it was economic. While America was building military bases in 80 countries, spending $8 trillion on wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and maintaining 750 overseas military installations, China was building ports, railroads, highways, power plants, and telecommunications infrastructure across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East through the Belt and Road Initiative. The Portuguese real, the Spanish silver peso, the Dutch guilder, and the British pound all lost global dominance as their empires declined. Every single one. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are developing alternative payment systems and discussing a potential common settlement currency. Central banks in China, India, Russia, Turkey, and Poland have been buying gold at record quantities for 4 consecutive years, reducing their dependence on dollar-denominated reserves. The People's Bank of China reduced its U.S. Treasury holdings from $1.3 trillion to approximately $760 billion, a 42% reduction. Gold crossed $4,500 per ounce. And the weaponization of the dollar through sanctions, freezing Russian foreign exchange reserves, and threatening secondary sanctions on countries that trade with American adversaries has accelerated the search for alternatives. When you turn your currency into a weapon, the rest of the world looks for a shield. And the shield they are building is a financial system that does not run through New York. That does not settle in dollars, That does not depend on the Federal Reserve. Every empire's currency decline is a lagging indicator of the empire's decline itself. The currency is the last thing to go because it benefits from inertia, from network effects, from the sheer weight of institutional habit. But once the decline reaches a tipping point, it accelerates rapidly. The British pound went from the world's dominant reserve currency to a secondary one in less than 30 years after World War II. The dollar's decline has been gradual for 26 years. The question is whether you are watching the gradual phase or whether the tipping point has already passed and the acceleration has begun. And the Iran war may have been the event that pushed it past the tipping point. The IEA called the Strait of Hormuz closure the greatest energy security challenge in history, and the country that was supposed to lead the global response instead triggered the crisis, failed to resolve it through diplomacy, and is now maintaining a naval blockade of the same waterway it was supposed to protect. The empire that built the post-war global order is now the largest source of instability within it. And the world is taking note. The IMF cut its global growth forecast because of the war. Central banks are hoarding reserves in anticipation of more instability. And the 120 countries that already trade primarily with China are watching the American empire demonstrate, in real time, that its military power creates economic chaos rather than economic security. That demonstration is worth more to de-dollarization than any BRICS summit resolution ever written. RANKED 132 ND in peace, 42 ND in life expectancy, 36 TH in math, 28 TH in democracy, and 57 TH in press freedom. Wikipedia maintains a comprehensive page of international rankings of the United States. And reading it is like reading an autopsy report of a country that is still technically alive. The Global Peace Index ranks the United States 132nd out of 162 countries. 132nd. That puts America in the bottom quarter of the world's nations for peacefulness, alongside countries that are in active conflict or chronic instability. The Democracy Index published by The Economist ranks the United States 28th out of 167 countries. Classified as a flawed democracy, not a full democracy, the Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index ranks the United States 57th out of 180 countries. The Human Development Index ranks it 20th. The Rule of Law Index ranks it 26th. Income inequality is 61st highest out of 168 countries measured by the World Bank. Life expectancy is approximately 42nd. And in the PISA education rankings, American students rank 36th in math among OECD nations. Now compare those rankings to what Americans were told about their country for the past 50 years. They were told it was the greatest country on earth, the freest country, the most democratic, the most innovative, the most prosperous, the most peaceful. And by the measurements that the rest of the world uses to evaluate those claims, America does not crack the top 20 in most categories and does not crack the top 40 in several. The country that calls itself exceptional ranks behind Estonia in education, behind Costa Rica in life expectancy, behind Uruguay in democracy, and behind Namibia in press freedom. Those are not failed states. Those are countries that invested differently than America invested. They invested in their people. America invested in its military and its financial sector. And the rankings reflect the cumulative result of those investment choices compounded over decades. An empire that ranks 132nd in peace is not an empire that the world trusts to lead. An empire that ranks 42nd in life expectancy is not an empire that takes care of its own citizens. An empire that ranks 36th in math is not an empire that is building the workforce that will compete in the next century. Those numbers are not opinions, they are measurements, published by international organizations with standardized methodologies that apply the same criteria to every country on Earth. And the education rankings deserve a moment of their own, because education is the leading indicator of imperial trajectory. Every empire that ever rose on education first. The Dutch Republic in the 17th century had the highest literacy rate in Europe. Britain in the 19th century had the most advanced university system in the world. America in the 20th century built the public school system and the public university system that produced the scientists, engineers, doctors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs who made the American century possible. And now American 15-year-olds rank 36th in math among OECD nations. Singapore, which is a city-state smaller than New York City, outperforms the United States in every educational category. Estonia, a former Soviet republic with a population smaller than Philadelphia, outperforms the United States in math, science, and reading. And China, the rising challenger, is producing approximately 4.7 million STEM graduates per year, compared to approximately 800. Zero in the United States. That ratio, nearly 6-to-1, is the ratio that determines who builds the technologies, the industries, and the infrastructure of the next century. The country that educates more engineers builds more. The country that builds more trades more. The country that trades more earns more. The country that earns more dominates, and by that logic the trajectory is unmistakable. America is not building the workforce that competes in the next century. It is building the workforce that services the debts of the previous one. And by those criteria, the American empire is not the greatest country on earth. It is a country in measurable, documented, accelerating decline across nearly every dimension that matters for the long-term viability of a civilization. Military overextension is costing $886 billion per year while bridges collapse and water systems poison children. The United States spends approximately $886 billion per year on defense, more than the next 10 countries combined. It maintains approximately 750 military installations in 80 countries. It has signed more than 20 military agreements in the past 25 years. And it just fought a war with Iran that damaged more than 80 energy facilities across the Gulf, triggered the largest global oil supply disruption in history, and sent consumer prices in America surging at the fastest rate in 4 years. The cost of that military reach, measured not just in dollars but in diplomatic credibility, in energy security, in inflation, in the trust of allies who were caught in the crossfire, is mounting in ways that the defense budget does not capture. And while $886 billion per year flows to the military, the American Society of Civil Engineers gives American infrastructure an overall grade of C-. 43% of public roads are in poor or mediocre condition. 46,000 bridges are structurally deficient. The water systems that deliver drinking water to American homes lose approximately 6 billion gallons per day to leaks in aging pipes. There are an estimated 9.2 million lead service lines still in use. Flint, Michigan was not an anomaly, it was a symptom. Jackson, Mississippi, lost running water entirely during a cold snap because the system was too deteriorated to function under stress. The electric grid, which the Department of Energy has described as needing $1.4 trillion in investment, is being strained to breaking by extreme weather events and by the surge in data center construction that is consuming power at rates the grid was not designed to handle. And the country that cannot fix its own water pipes is spending $886 billion per year to project military force across 80 countries. Rome built roads that lasted 2,000 years. America cannot maintain roads that last 20. Rome expanded its military to defend territories it could no longer afford to hold. America maintains 750 bases to project power it can no longer afford to fund without borrowing $1 trillion every 100 days. The parallel is not metaphorical, it is structural. Empires that spend more on military expansion than on domestic maintenance are empires that are hollowing themselves out from the inside. The outside looks strong, the bases are staffed, the carriers are deployed. The aircraft fly. But inside the borders, the bridges are cracking, the pipes are leaking lead. The grid is failing, the schools are falling behind. And the citizens are dying 3.7 years younger than their peers in countries that chose to invest differently. You do not notice an empire dying from the outside. You notice it from the inside. You notice it when the water is brown, when the road has potholes that have been there for years, when the school does not have air conditioning, when the hospital bill bankrupts the family, when the bridge has a weight restriction because it cannot support a full load anymore. That is what dying looks like from the inside, and if you live in America, you are looking at it right now. And the most devastating indicator of all is not a number, it is a feeling. It is the feeling that 75% of Americans expressed when they told the Wall Street Journal that hard work no longer leads to economic gain. It is the feeling that 79% expressed when they said the country is falling apart. It is the feeling that 70% expressed when they said the American dream is dead. That feeling is not irrational. That feeling is the population's nervous system, processing decades of cumulative evidence that the institutions, the infrastructure, the healthcare system, the education system, the financial system, and the political system are no longer functioning in the interest of ordinary people. And that feeling, when it reaches critical mass in a population, is the single most reliable predictor of imperial decline that historians have ever identified. Because an empire does not collapse because its enemies are too strong. An empire collapses because its own citizens stop believing it is worth defending, worth investing in, worth sacrificing for. When 75% of the population no longer believes the fundamental promise of the country, the empire is not at risk of dying. The empire is already dying, you are watching it, you are living inside it. And the only question left is whether the people who are watching it will demand something different before the trajectory becomes irreversible, or whether they will do what the citizens of every previous empire did. Watch, wait, and wonder years later how it happened so fast when the signs were there the entire time.